Hello and welcome to Round Robin. I'm your host, Robin McCormick with the City of Hampton's Communications and Marketing Department. And today we're going to delve a little bit into one of the more painful chapters in Hampton's history and this country's history, and that's the issue of slavery. My guest today is Calvin Pearson. Welcome, Calvin.
Well, thank you for having me.
And Chadra Pittman Walke. Welcome.
Thank you.
Now, Calvin, I have to say, your name is so closely associated in my mind, and I suppose the mind of a lot of people out there, with the arrival of the first Africans and the effort to recognize and commemorate that chapter. You've been doing this for a long time.
I've been doing it for probably 15 years, and you're right, I probably have become the face of the movement. But there are a lot of people behind me who have been working on this. You talked about a painful chapter in Hampton's and America's history. It was painful, but we believe it's an event that we always need to remember. We cannot forget what happened. We need to learn from the past and make sure it doesn't happen again. So about 15 years ago, we just started this movement to let people know about Hampton's great African American history and the diversity of the city. So we started a movement to help promote the fact that the first Africans who were brought to America on English land arrived here in Hampton at Point Comfort, today's Fort Monroe.
You know, I have to be honest, I didn't know that. I had no idea. And it is something that, it's a little painful to promote. Hi, welcome, we're the home of slavery. I mean, you don't want to do that as a city, but you also can't ignore that because you look at where this country is now.
Right, you can't ignore history, you can't erase history. When we look at Hampton, we look at where we've come from since 1619. We're not embarrassed about slavery. It's something that happened, we cannot change it. But look where we've come as a city and as a nation from 1619. We fought through segregation, we fought through civil rights. We have a black president. So there's a lot that we've achieved, so we don't see the reason to not talk about it, we don't want to be ashamed of it. But one of the big things that we've done over the past 15 years is that dispelling the myth of Jamestown. We were all taught that first Africans were brought to Jamestown. And we know that that was a political and historical event that they changed almost 400 years ago. So for the past 15 years, we've been trying to rewrite and tell the true story of the Africans about their arrival here at Point Comfort, today's Fort Monroe in Hampton. So it's an ongoing struggle. Just recently I had an issue with Jamestown about a marker that they were planning to put in, and they wanted to say the Africans landed at Jamestown. And fortunately we were able to campaign against that marker. The marker now truly reflects that the Africans did indeed land at Point Comfort because we've got all the documentation to prove it. So,
well, and I think some of that wasn't, I mean, it took a while for some of that to come about. There wasn't always great documentation of what happened back in 1619.
Well, the documentation was there in 1619.
Right.
It got changed.
Oh.
And back in 1619, John Rolfe, who was the widow of Pocahontas, was at Fort Monroe or Point Comfort. He said he was a witness to the boat pulling into the docks. He was a witness to the Africans getting off the boat at Point Comfort. John Rolfe was the secretary of the Virginia colony, and it was his job to document in his diary everything that happened in Hampton and report back to England. And in his diary, he wrote that in the latter part of August, 20 and odd Negroes were brought in on the ship.
Now, were they, I understand that, or at least what I've heard, and maybe I'm wrong, that there's some question as to whether they were officially enslaved or were considered perhaps indentured servants.
The documentation shows that all of them originally were indentured servants because Virginia did not know what slavery was all about. Slavery was not part of the Virginia vocabulary.
Indentured servitude was pretty common.
Indentured servitude was going on because they were bringing white indentured servants from England. So when the Africans arrived, they treated them as indentured servants. Some of them were treated as indentured servants, and then some of them became indentured servants for life. And then later on, they became slaves as a slave became a vocabulary word in the English colony. So there's different stories, but we know beyond the fact that they were indentured servants originally, but as the need for free labor increased and the production of cotton and tobacco came along, the free labor.
It changed the economics.
It changed economics where.
Well, economics changed.
Economics changed where you needed that free labor, and why let them go? Because really they owned them at that time.
Okay. So who was that first boat? Who was on that first boat?
Well, the first boat, the name of the ship was the White Lion, and we've traced the White Lion back. We know it was an English ship. It had gone to Holland and gotten a license to pirate ships. So it was flying a Dutch flag when it entered the waters, the Hampton Harbor, going toward Point Comfort. We know that on that boat there were 20 and odd Negroes that had been captured from a Portuguese slave ship. And we know that all 20 and odd of those Africans disembarked at Point Comfort. We also know their names of many of those who were on the ship, because the ones who were on the ship had been baptized back in Angola, Africa is from where they came from. So they had been baptized. They had Christian names such as Antonio and Isabella and Pedro. So two of the Africans who got off the ship at Point Comfort were Antonio and Isabella. They were in the household of Captain William Tucker, who was the commander at Point Comfort. And if you know the history of Hampton, with the William Tucker family, the first African child born of descent in North America was born right here in Hampton. His name was William Tucker.
And I think, again, that's one of those stories that some people have known, or that's been passed through perhaps his lineage and his family, many of whom I understand are still here, or connections and relatives, but that the broader population doesn't necessarily know.
And that's the reason why we worked so hard on this project, to get the truth out there. A lot of us know the truth, but it's trying to get the community and the region and the nation to know Hampton's history. Because although some people see part of our African history as shameful, we want to promote Hampton's rich African American history, and we need to share everything that happened.
Well, and you have those sort of, those seminal moments with the first arrival, and then with the contraband decision. So
Exactly.
you have kind of the roots of slavery, and then you have the roots of emancipation here as well.
Well, that's part of the reason why, when I started the Remembrance Ceremonies here in Hampton last year, part of the reason why I wanted to do them in Hampton is because Hampton sits so uniquely, it's so uniquely positioned with regards to slavery. You have the beginning of slavery, and then you have the contraband decision, where you had all these Africans who were enslaved that went to Fort Monroe, which became known as Freedom's Fortress. So Hampton is the beginning of slavery, and it's also the beginning of emancipation. And this year, 2013, Project 1619, we did an Emancipation Day event to commemorate the 150th anniversary of the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation. So, as you mentioned, Robin, it is a painful chapter in Americans' history, but I always tell people the reason why we remember, it's the same reason why we remember what happened during the Holocaust. It's the same reason why we remember what happened during 9/11 and the World Trade Center bombing, where you have people that go and remember their loved ones every year. This notion of remembrance and recognizing our history and our culture is imperative, so that we don't repeat, as Calvin said, the painful parts of our past. So
how did you get involved? You're in Project 1619, but you also have another group that you're involved with.
Yes, the Sankofa Projects. And I got involved with Calvin. Calvin attended my Remembrance.
He's very persuasive.
Yes. Well, it wasn't hard, actually, because I really believe in the work of Project 1619, and he is persuasive. But he attended last year our inaugural event at Buckrow Beach, and the Remembrance Ceremonies. It's a 23-year tradition. It started in New York, and now we have Remembrance Ceremonies that happen all across the United States, as well as in Africa and in Panama. And on the second Saturday in June, we honor the Africans who perished during the Middle Passage.
Oh,
and
gosh.
Dr. John Henry Clark, who's a historian, said that if the Atlantic were to dry up, it would reveal a scattered pathway of bones leading from Africa, showing the path of the Middle Passage. So this notion of remembrance is really, really important. And I did a remembrance ceremony for Project 1619, and we've been working together ever since to promote Hampton's history, because it's all of our history, and that's really something that Calvin and I and the entire project, we've been trying to get people to understand that this is not just African American history. This is the history of the United States, and slavery affected the globe, so it's global history as well. And being a part of this movement with Project 1619, we encourage people to get involved in this project. It is worthwhile.
Okay, so let's actually, now that we've covered a little bit of the history, and I know we could probably go on and do a lot more details, but let's talk about the events that you have planned this year.
Okay.
Because there's a mixture of things.
Yeah, there's a mixture. We start off on Friday night, August 16th, with a reception at the Hampton History Museum. And what's so unique about this is that we're going to show the world premiere of a documentary produced by the Angolan government.
That sounds really exciting.
It is, because
wow.
As we try to promote Hampton's history, the Angolan government, until they heard about us, did not know that the first Africans that were brought to Point Comfort, Fort Monroe, came from Angola. And they just recently found that out in the past couple of years because of the work we're doing. So the Angolan government came to Hampton and did a documentary about the arrival of the first Africans and the fact that they were Angolans. And now we have the opportunity to show that documentary as a world premiere. Never been seen before in the United States. It's going to be the world premiere showing of the documentary produced by the Angolan government.
And that's an interesting way. You know, us as Americans, we think of how this affected us.
Right.
But you think it also affected the whole continent of Africa, and all those people,
Right.
you know, stolen and captured and pulled
Absolutely.
away from their societies.
And you're talking about 15 million people or more. So imagine what that does to a country and a community to have that many people taken away.
Especially of a particular
devastating.
generation. I mean, they
Absolutely.
wanted primarily the people who were young and healthy and strong, and you pull those out of.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And this is a free event that we're doing at the Hampton History Museum, thanks to Lucy Cochran and her staff at the Hampton History Museum. On Saturday, we're at the American Theater in Phoebus. We have a symposium. We have a panel of speakers coming in. We're going to talk about the early history of colonial America from 1619 to 1661. We're going to talk about cultural retentions. And this is going to go on from 10 a.m. until 3 p.m. And it's free, so we encourage the public to come out to this free event.
So 2 free events, well, there's another, okay, so at least 2 are free
Right.
events.
Those
And then
are 2.
Saturday evening's a little different.
Saturday evening, we have the 3rd annual Virginia Juneteenth Jazz and Heritage and Reconciliation Concert. Now, people ask me, why are you doing Juneteenth Jazz in August? The National Juneteenth Observance Foundation, they do Juneteenth Jazz every month. They can't do it in every city.
You can't do it all,
in
right,
June,
on the
so,
same time.
Right.
So because Hampton is where the first Africans came ashore, National Juneteenth decided that they wanted to do a jazz concert in Hampton every August. So we have a jazz concert at 6 o'clock at the American Theater.
Now let me just give you a quick description of what Juneteenth is, because there may be people out there who don't know.
Well, this is a good question. We locally, we know about the Emancipation Proclamation. Supposedly was read on an oak tree that became the Emancipation Oak on January 3rd of 1863. That proclamation had to travel from city to city to city. It took them 2.5 years to get to Galveston, Texas. So for 2.5 years, those enslaved Africans were still working as slaves. 2.5 years later, on June 19th of 1865, the Emancipation Proclamation finally reached Galveston, Texas. That they were documented as the last outpost to free the slaves. So June 19th became what we call June 19th because that was the last day of slavery in Texas.
Okay, but then back to this year's event, and we need to wrap up because we're running out of time. But and then you're going to have the Remembrance event on
Right.
that's Tuesday,
That's
right?
going to be on Tuesday at 7 p.m. at Fort Monroe. And the Remembrance Ceremony, again, we're honoring the arrival of the first Africans, and there will be drumming and dancing, and it's a celebration of the enslaved people who built America.
And that is also free.
That is also free.
And so this now, I mean, you're really trying to do this every year. This is going to be, as you said, there's an official proclamation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we have an official proclamation, and what we're building up to is that in 1619, the 400th anniversary of the arrival of
Right,
the
in
first
2019, right,
Africans.
right.
In 2019.
Which is pretty darn soon.
400th anniversary, what we're doing is that we're working in partnership with the City of Hampton and the Fort Monroe Authority to build a monument at Fort Monroe to honor the arrival and the 400th anniversary of the first Africans in Hampton, in North America, on English colony.
And maybe get the attention of the nation, a little bit broader audience to see and to remember what happened.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
It's an awareness program. It's also a fundraising program.
Right.
We need money to build a monument.
Build that
Well,
monument.
and the awareness, just to say, the awareness is already there. I mean,
And
President
growing.
Barack Obama recognized Fort Monroe
That's right.
in 2011.
That monument is a huge
exactly.
piece of that.
So it's
right.
a monument.
And that history.
Absolutely.
Well, I hate to close off because I know we could talk about this for a long time, but we do have to wrap up to get this on the air.
Thank you for having us this morning.
Thank you for coming, and I look forward to you coming back and telling us a little bit more about the history of those first
It'll be our
Africans.
pleasure.
Thank you. And thank you for watching. I hope you've learned a little bit about our past.